Hello, everybody. It's 8 o'clock, so time to get things started. My name is Sam Podansky, and I'm the head and founder of Jane Novel Club. And tonight we have a very interesting panel about localization and how do we go about actually translating things in this industry. So I hope we sort of have some interesting things to talk about. And we have a lot of talent in localization on the stage, including me and one of our editors and a translator as well. So first, I'd just sort of like to ask each of them to introduce themselves. So I believe first, if you could introduce yourself on the far left. Who are you, and what do you do in terms of localization?
Yeah, so I'm a late addition to this panel because I only found out I'm coming like 2-3 days ago. So I'm Hoki. I do 2 translations for J Novel Club. The titles are The Magic in This World, Other World is Too Far Behind, and An Archdemon's Dilemma, How to Love Your Elf Bride. Yeah.
And who's right? I have another talented, this time he's not a translator, but editor that also works with us.
Hi, I'm Manish Mogati, and I'm from actually Ontario, so I just drove down yesterday with a friend here. And I work on Ari Ferretta in Another World with my smartphone, and also An Archdemon's Dilemma, How to Love Your Elf Bride with Coco.
Yeah. So this is one of the rare times in my company when the translator and editor actually get together in person, because all my staff lives who knows where around the world really, and it's not so often that the team actually gets to meet up. So this is a good opportunity for them to get on the same page. Haha, publisher joke.
Yeah, we actually found out we only live like 40 minutes apart, the two of us, because of this con, so thanks for that.
And finally, to give you a little more background on myself, my name is Sam Podansky, and prior to founding J Novel Club about 2 years ago, I worked in Tokyo as a localizer and did all kinds of stuff, basically running a localization group for Yomiuri Television, where we did a lot of the simulcast anime that you watch, as well as variety shows and stuff for internal sales and movie subtitles. Back in the day, I actually was one of Crunchyroll's very first subtitlers. So if you know Shugokara, anybody fans of that back in the day, 10 years ago, or even some shows like the original Cobra TV anime I did, and I did a lot of stuff for Funimation.com as well, like Tommy Galaxy fans in the thing, maybe? Okay. Yay! So I did a bunch of the subs. Now I sort of run a company and manage a bunch of localizers, so I like to think I know something about localization. So the first topic I want to do is just actually talk about what localization is and give a definition, because there is actually some confusion. Some people say the word localized and they sort of have a negative connotation. They're like, oh, I don't want my anime localized because you turn, onigiri into jelly donuts, right? I mean, so it has a bit of a bad rap because of the way it's been used, but localization is actually super important, right? Localization is the process of taking the tool you have when it comes to localizing. But translation is probably the most important part, but there's all kinds of things that you might have to do for localization. It could even encompass like changing your video from PAL to NTSC, right? That's also sort of part of localization. You just have to make sure it's viewable and enjoyable in this new market that you're publishing in. So that's really what I want to say about localization and how it's so important. And a lot of times for readers and consumers, you don't even know games that came out. They completely redid the menuing system for the Western releases, because the original Japanese releases all had that really slow, old-fashioned one like they had in the NES, but the PlayStation ones in the West, they redid the menuing system completely to make it more modern, because they realized that the West didn't have that nostalgia for the old-fashioned menuing system in the Dragon Quest games. And there are aspects like that to localization which are sort of not seen so much by the actual audience and are really important for making things a success in the new market. Okay. So one other thing that I sort of want to talk about that relates to us specifically is that in terms of localization of otaku stuff, this is Otakuthon, so we want to talk really just about anime, manga, games, and light novels. there's a lot of differences between localization of those different mediums. And you really have to think about actually how the mediums are presented to the readers and how you have to consider and adapt your localization to those things. A very good example where you have to get really, really, really tight with the actual timing and switch that to another language. Otherwise, when people are viewing it, they hear the voices that aren't matching up to the animation, and it can be really distracting. So both of those aspects of localization are different depending on the medium. Another really great example of that is the difference between manga and light novels. So we at J Novel Club, we translate light novels, and light novels don't have pictures, or like not every page. There are some illustrations, but they mostly just text. And so what we can do with the translation in terms of changing the order of sentences sometimes, or adding speaker tags, or rewriting some of the dialogue, these things are something that you really just can't do when translating manga. Other challenges that you have with manga is you often have the order of the panels have to be read right to left, or these days almost, and nobody flips the actual images anymore. So you have to read things from right to left. Manga gets more digitally produced in the future, that'll actually get. So yeah, that's right. I'm just checking my schedule here. So one other aspect of localization that I don't think people talk about very much, because there really isn't that many people out there who have experience with this, but at J Novel Club we have almost 50 localizers. That includes the translators, the editors, the quality checkers, plus a lot of freelancers. And managing all these people on 30, 40 projects at the same time is actually a very difficult task for management in general. I have experience doing this for over 10 years now. Whether it's managing simulcast subtitle production, or managing manga, the translation for J Manga back in the day, and now we're going to start doing that for J Novel Club. And of course, translating light novels with over, I guess, almost 170 volumes that we've published over the past 2 years now. I have a lot of experience with managing translators and editors and checkers. And to give you guys some advice, if you're ever in the position of being one of these staff or working in a company like this, every person's situation is different. And it's extremely important to sort of, I know this is going to sound sappy, but you have to empathize with each individual person's circumstances. One of the things that we do at J Novel Club, which is sort of new, special in the industry, is I don't offer like a one-size-fits-all compensation package. Like most localization is done on a sort of fixed rate, so much per character, so much per minute, etc. But I offer my translators a selection of options for whether you take the flat rate or they have an option to earn money based off the sales of the book that they're working on. And that actually enables people to choose sort of a schedule that fits their own lifestyle and fits their own work style. The second thing that we do that's sort of unique in the industry is I allow a lot of autonomy. How do you say this? Autonomy. Thank you. I allow a lot of autonomy in terms of the localization teams. All of our light novels have a translator and editor, and one team is sitting here next to me. And I don't get in the way. Like, I know actually another publisher once, I won't say which one it was, but another publisher was like, "Don't you have any standards?" And I was like, "Yes, I have standards, but I don't really care whether whether there's a space after an ellipse, when it's in mid-sentence, or no space after an ellipse if there's mid-sentence, or whether we use the one British spellings or English spellings for certain words. I just want it consistent within a single series, and then after that, it's up to the translation team, the localization team, to decide that among themselves. And if there's an argument, they can come to me and I'll make a call. But allowing people to really actually make decisions on their own and not dictating everything from above gives them a sense of self-confidence in their work. And that is super important for maintaining the cohesion of so many teams at the same time. If you don't give them the autonomy, then they just act like machines waiting to be given orders all the time. And that is not how you actually get things done in the industry. It's really important to give people the sense of self-worth. Another thing that is super important for managing large teams of people is getting them talking to each other, even if they're not actually working on the same project. I think a revolution that we do, and that I totally stole from fan subgroups, is we use Slack, which is effectively IRC, internally for our company. Everybody is together in the Slack. We all talk to each other. We have AE channels in there where people can ask questions about localization, ask for advice, just, have fun, talk, post memes. And it's not, these are freelancers, they're not employees necessarily, right? But but I treat them more like the secret to J-Novel Club, I like to say, is that the club is the staff. It's not the people subscribing to the service. And so I think that actually really makes a difference in our quality and the perception of the quality of work out there on the internet, because the people who do the localization have pride in what they do, and well, except for Manish here, he's
Don't single me out on stage.
he's just very embarrassed. Don't worry about him. No, he does a great job with Ari Verda, of course. And how many fan people actually have read any of J-Novel Club's late novels? Anybody in the audience? Yeah, see? And I bet how many of those have read Ari Verda? See, you got some fans, so be proud. Yeah, and that's, I think, though, that sense of self-worth and what you can do as a localizer is really important to grow. And then once they have that, and they have the confidence, then they do their best work. And that, I think, is super important for managing a team of localizers. Okay. Now, I actually kind of wanted to ask Manish. No, you first. Yeah, you're the first one.
Okay.
So speak a little bit about how your team works and how you work with the translators on your 3 projects, and how what that freedom gives you the ability to do for your project.
Okay, so I'll say that my workflow for every single project is pretty much completely different. For Ari Ferretta, we work off a Google Doc sheet basically, and the translator fills it in. I edit as there's new information there, sometimes early, sometimes not, just depending on each of our schedules. For smartphone, it's more the translator finishes translating everything, and he sends me the Excel file as soon as he's done the part that's going to go on the site. And sometimes that gets a little dicey because I'm just standing there waiting basically for the entire thing, and I can only start editing as soon as the part's completely done. Whereas with Ari Ferretta, I can start basically whenever anything is translated at all. And just recently, I started working on Elf Bride with Derek here, and he's completely different. I was sitting there waiting for my part basically 2 weeks before the first 4 parts were due, sorry. And I was like, crap, when am I gonna get them? Am I gonna have time to do this? I don't even know, is he any good? It might take me forever. And then all of a sudden I just get an email saying, oh, here's all of volume 1, here's my terminology sheet, go nuts. And I'm just like, oh. And now I'm a completely different kind of nervous, obviously, because I'm like, oh crap, how do I, if anything's wrong, how do I tell him he's already done? Getting nervous. But that ended up really well, and it gave me a lot of leeway and time. So it just completely depends on the person that you're working with, basically, and you have to hash it out, and it's a lot of a special relationship between each translator.
Yeah, that special relationship is a good term. I like to think of every person as a unique individual, which is hard to do in this day and age sometimes. But if you know the person, then you know what the workflow needs to be to get that person to do the best work, basically. And adapting that to every person is going to be different. So I think actually the biggest mistake that other translation companies do is they try and set standards. People say to me, and it's not, I don't mean standards in terms of quality standards. I mean standards in terms of this is how you should work, this is when your deadline should be, this is when you need to turn into the editor, this is when the editor needs to turn back, you need to do 2 rounds and then a quality check, you need to follow this style guide. Every rule you set makes it less likely that the workflow is going to work for this particular team. And the more freedom you give them, the more likely it is for them to come up with sort of an optimal workflow among themselves. So all that really matters is that the final product is good quality, right? That you guys don't read the drafts, hopefully. Well, actually, for J-Novel Club, you sort of do, if you're reading the pre-pubs online. But okay, putting that aside. But that's really what matters, is the final product. And as long as you can give people the amount of leeway that they need to produce, what the best work they can give, that's all that really matters to me. So that's my advice to budding localization team managers. I don't know if there's any in the audience today, but it's very important.
I mean, maybe they're watching the stream to steal your secrets. That's
right. I mean, J-Novel Club and the way we work is really different than almost anybody else. So if there are people out there who are wondering how in the world we managed to publish 170 light novel volumes in 2 years, well, this is how. It's finding a lot of really talented people and letting them go. So speaking of J-Novel Club and light novel localization, we talked a little bit about manga, we talked a little bit about anime, but one thing that's really cool that I think we do at J-Novel Club is light novel localization. So how many of you as the audience have ever even read a light novel? Okay, so even if you haven't read a J-Novel Club light novel, you've read light novels, and you understand that, well, they're books, right? They've got a couple pictures, but it's just text. Whenever I test a new translator, and they've never had an experience of translating anything except for manga or anime, I tell them that translating light novels is a whole nother ballgame. I give the metaphor that translating a light novel is like translating naked. Right? Well, and I'll explain what I mean by that. When you're translating anime, you're putting text on a video with sound, and all you're really doing is like putting the subtitles on. When you're translating manga, you have it's a little bit more about your words, but even so, it's still a picture on every page just showing you what's going on. But when you're translating a novel, the Japanese text is gone. All that's on that page is your words as the translator and editor, but all that's on that page is your words. There's nothing between you and the reader. No clothes, no nothing. You're just right out there in their face. And for a translator, if you've ever tried to translate something yourself, that's scary, right? Every single word you're typing is going to be read and understood in some way, and you have to be really, really careful that what you're typing and what you're writing is good and expresses the original Japanese perfectly, because nothing else is there except for your words. So that is a super important aspect to translating light novels. And that sort of ties into what makes a good novel translator. And a big part of it is a good writer. You have to be able to write in English well to be a good translator. The editor is not going to go and rewrite every sentence. In fact, if they are, and the way a lot of translation used to be done, that is actually what they did. They were called rewriters, right? But if you want to really produce something that's of good quality, the translator themselves needs to be a good writer. And my best translators are also my best writers. And that's a super important aspect to that. Secondly, light novels have all kinds of quirky ways that they're written in Japanese. Like light novels, if you read Japanese bulletin boards or Japanese messages about light novels, people will say, oh, that's written, they'll complain about some book and say, oh, that's written like it's a light novel or something. The way light novels are written derives from how they were created, which was not like a normal novel at all. Rather, they were more a transcript of a Dungeons and Dragons game. That's actually the source of the original light novel, Lotus War, right? Chronicles of Lotus War. That was actually started as a D&D session between a bunch of people at, I believe it was one university in Tokyo. Do you know which one? But anyway, it was Aomori University in Tokyo, I think. But a D&D session that happened that was then turned into a series of articles in Comptique magazine. where they were basically trying to teach Japanese kids how to play D&D because it had just come over in the 1970s. And then those D&D sessions were later published together as a novel, which became Record of Lotus War. And that and later on became sort of understood as the first real light novel. And ever since then, that sort of archetype as a retelling of a story of what's happening to these characters and the focus on characters and dialogue became the hallmark of the light novel style. So that writing in itself poses a challenge for translation. When you're reading a dialogue, let's say we have In Another World with My Smartphone, a good example that Manish is. How many wives does Toya have?
9.
Right. Oh boy. Name them all. No, I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, and how many times are they all in the same room and all say effectively the same thing in a row?
I don't think I can count.
Yeah. And how many of those lines of dialogue say who says what line?
Maybe 1 in 20.
Oh boy.
So now, in Japanese, they can tell just by reading the Japanese because every Turtle character has a different. I don't want to get too much into the language details of the language here, but one is a Desuwa character. One uses samurai speak, so she's like Gozaru. One would speak, use a different pronoun, so she'd be a Bokugo. Everyone has a certain trait about how they speak in Japanese, but those subtle grammatical changes are not really, they don't exist in English. We only have I. There's a single first-person pronoun. There's no way to easily change the copula in English because we don't use a copula like desu or da or desho or degozaru. Those are all mean effectively the same thing, but they're just different ways of speaking. So we have to identify the characters somehow in their dialogue in light novels. And that is something that the editor often will need to deal with. So, Manish, how do you deal with that in Smartphone?
A lot of it I have to give credit to my translator. We just work on it together a lot of times by discussing while he's working on the parts. And if not, most characters at this point are already set in stone because we're 10 volumes in now, I believe, which is... This thing's going to continue forever, I swear. Oh, God. But yeah, usually it's just the translator and the editor discuss and decide if certain things are appropriate for a character. And sometimes you have to reel in a translator as an editor, which is often my challenge on Smartphone.
Yeah, Steiner, the translator for In Another World by Smartphone, he tends to go for the more localized ways of doing things. So he'll try and make every one of the 9 characters speak in a unique way, and it can get kind of it can go a little too far. Sometimes we have to reel them back. Sometimes all we do is just add in, said X, after the dialogue. It's as simple as that. Sometimes we just add in the speaker tag. And other times we'll use more clever ways to indicate who is saying what. And it's a big challenge with light novels, and it's a fundamental problem with the language, effectively. But we try very hard to produce books that end up being easily readable. They are light novels. That's one of the purposes of them. They're trying to, they're supposed to be easy reads. And so we're not going to force the user to the reader to read every sentence and sort of think about it. Wait, which character is this, and what are they saying? We want to avoid that kind of confusion. We just want to have people be able to read it and not think about it, just like the original Japanese.
Steiner objects.
Steiner objects. Has he already said something? He's watching this live.
He is.
Yeah. Tell him that is what was it? What was the accent he gave that character up in the Babylon? The one who speaks like Mario. He speaks like a bad Italian. She speaks like a bad Italian plumber. I don't know about that one, but thankfully it's a minor character, so I let it slide. I'm like, okay, fine. It'll be good in the dub, I guess, if there's ever a dub. Okay. Actually, I want to ask Hoki to talk a little bit more about challenges in translating light novels that he's encountered in some of his work.
Sure. So, a bit of background. I actually don't come from a written Japanese translation background. Up until about 5 years ago, I was doing mostly business in Japan, where I was dealing with Japanese engineers, and we were doing meetings. So I was doing live voiced translations for engineers. Is this better? Can everyone hear me now? So a lot of my translation is based for, before I started doing light novels, was for engineers, which was all about technical details, getting everything perfectly accurate in a way that everybody could understand. So about, I think it was 1 year ago, I picked up fan translation. So I took my passion for anime, manga, and light novels and decided, hey, I could probably contribute to the community. So let's just buy a light novel I like and start writing it in English, which turns out is very different from doing technical translations for engineers.
Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? So when Japanese characters started talking and they all have these different voice tics, and you're like, how do I get any of this across in a way that is understandable? It is actually all very hard, but it is all very interesting. So what I always try to get across in my translations is trying to get accurate enough of the original context while still making it readable in English. So that's generally character speech is what I usually have the most challenges with when doing written translations. And then specifically for Magic in This Other World is Too Far Behind, translating into Latin from Japanese is definitely interesting. I do know Latin a bit, but then taking Japanese and turning it into Latin is, I think it's a fairly unique skill set.
Maybe you should explain why you have to translate Japanese to Latin.
Yeah.
Oh, so the original Latin, and so the way they work in this book was they usually write this really long, complex, and fruity spell in completely in Japanese. So it uses big, complicated words as much as possible. And then instead of writing furigana, which is a pronunciation guide for big, complicated words, they try to fill the furigana with Latin or English or Greek or Sanskrit. So those are the 4 languages that showed up in this novel. And none of it was coherent in English, which was very obvious when you just say, okay, so to keep the original context, I have to write the entirety of the spell in English the way the author wrote it. Except the author clearly does not have a real grasp on English grammar or vocabulary or sentence structure or punctuation. So it ends up being a problem when you write this thing that makes no sense, followed by the exact same thing but much more clear. And it turns out this propagated out towards his Latin as well, where most of the words were not actually even Latin. Some of them were, but they were the wrong word, and there was no concept of conjugation or grammar or using the right kind of, I don't know what you call it, but putting the right letters and vowels at the end of words to change whether who the speaker is and who like the target of an adjective is and all that stuff.
How many Latin speakers in the audience?
Yeah.
All right.
We have one.
All right.
One. So
Anyway.
that makes 2 of us. It's a deaf language for a reason, but this light novel is filled with all this Latin, and I'm like, okay, let's take Japanese and turn it into Latin that works, kind of. And yeah, so that was actually a fun challenge. I actually spend more time translating Japanese to Latin than probably the rest of the entire volume.
He's a talent, that's for sure. So it's actually pretty amazing. Like when I asked him to take these translations that he'd done and turn them into the official translations. We then re-edit them, and now it's like really like the new volume's about to come out, and you're going to do it officially for us whenever it gets published in Japan, anyway.
Ruined my plans.
Oh, you ruined my plan. Oh yeah, that's
I was
right.
all ready to do it. So most of my translation, my username Hikoki is plain in Japanese, and it's because my primary job I spend a lot of time flying. So a lot of my time flying is spent with a laptop translating because I needed something to do on the plane because I've watched every stupid movie that's on Air Canada. And they don't cycle them fast enough, so by the time I'm on another plane, it's the same movies as before until 3 months later. So you can only watch the same movies over and over again. So I just started translating on the plane. So a lot of my translation is actually done away from home. So on airplanes, in hotels, anywhere but in my actual home. And my plan for Volume 9 was I'm going to Europe next week, and I was supposed to land in my lap next week. So
Yeah, but unfortunately the Japanese publisher delayed it a month, so too bad. No matter how fast we are, we can't translate something that isn't published yet in Japan.
Unfortunately.
I don't know. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe they actually do have the manuscript, and I could really beg them
We can
for
get
it.
part one, yeah.
Hey man, probably not. Yeah, they probably delayed it for a reason. Anyway, okay. So I think actually, like, we don't have about 15 minutes left, or actually only about 10 at this point, maybe. So I'd like to open up the. I don't know how quickly they kick us out, but I'd like to open it up for questions for any of the three of us. They have about localization, whatever. I think this is a small enough room we can just don't need a microphone or anything. But I'll repeat it just for the sake of the video.
Question for you.
Okay.
Can I know in what context it was necessary to translate from Japanese into Latin?
Okay, so The Magic in This Other World is Too Far Behind is a story about a magician from modern Japan thrown into an isekai world, and as someone from modern Earth, in fact, most of his spells are in Latin. So to kind of represent the archaism of the roots of magic on Earth. So the author wanted to represent that by him using Latin, him using Greek, him using Sanskrit to show that he's versed in magic from all over the world. But the author does not actually know Latin. So if we were to publish to the Western world with a lot of broken Latin to a population that might actually know Latin, like in Japan, I'd say it's non-existent.
Yeah.
But in Europe, I feel like it's possible. Like there's one person here, so it does exist. So while we were fixing up all the English, we decided, hey, I happen to know this language as well, so let's fix up all the Latin as well.
Yeah. And the only way to fix it is to go to the original Japanese that the author was translating into Latin using the Freudiana text, and just redo that work basically, so to go straight from the Japanese to more correct Latin. Yeah. Okay, another question? Anybody else? Put up their hands and I'll call people. I'll ask questions. Let's go from the far left. You on the red.
I'll ask how your release schedule works. So you pick out a new series and ask like, hey, volume, how long does it take to like push them all out?
Sure.
You know, if like a long running series gets a new volume, how fast does it take to push a new book out?
So J Novel Club is notorious and or famous for a relatively quick release schedule. In general, I like to stick to 8 weeks for translating one volume. So we split every book into 8 parts and put up 1 part every week. Some books like Ari Furita are really long, so we'll do 10 weeks or even 12 weeks sometimes for, I think, the volume 8 is 460 pages? So we're going to do that in 12 weeks, I think, right?
Yeah, and I believe the next volume of Zero is going to be like 14
Next
parts.
volume of the Alfred to Zero Part 2 we're doing in 14 parts because, well, actually that's the latest volume that just came out in Japan, so Volume 3 isn't even out in Japan, so why not take some extra time, is my opinion. Generally, though, for series that have a lot of volumes, we do 8 weeks. Now, I've actually been asked this question, like, does it really take 2 months to translate 1 volume of a light novel? And the answer is no. A translator like Hikoki here can do it in 2 weeks if he wanted to.
1 week.
Don't give them too much credit.
Yeah, the 440-page article, I think, will take you 2 weeks.
Elf Pride is a bit.
Elf Pride's
was
pretty easy.
really
Anyways, but a translator can, if you're really good, you can translate quickly. But I don't actually ask my translators to translate that fast because it doesn't usually give you the best quality. If they can translate that fast, great. But do it in parts every week, space it out, and then I can give them 2 series at once, for example, if they're fast enough. And I actually found in my experience a translator working twice as fast on 1 series versus half as fast on 2 series, you're going to get better quality in the second selection because the human brain needs rest. When you're working really just on 1 series and focusing all your energy on a single series, you actually you get into ruts, you start missing things because you're skipping over stuff, you get too used to it. And by mixing things up, working on more than 1 show at once or more than 1 manga at once, a little bit, you maintain your freshness. of the translation, and it helps be the quality. So I don't push people faster than 8 weeks unless there's some special circumstances. Okay, next question. How about you on the far right?
Oh, okay. I was wondering, because I know this happens for like mainly anime dubs, but do you ever get requests from publishers or from authors for very specific things that you translate in a very specific way?
That's a very good question. So one aspect I haven't talked about is approvals and going to the Japanese licensors and rights holders. So I don't do anime dubs specifically, but subtitles or manga or light novels. The publishers and the Japanese rights holders do have the ability to say, we want you to translate something in this way, right? And sometimes that is perfectly nice and happy, and I'm like, oh, I'm glad that you gave us a translation for that because we had no idea what we were going to do. And sometimes it's like, no, we don't, no, that's a bad idea. And I'm one of those people, I live in Japan, I work directly with the industry, and I'm one of those people that's not afraid to go back at a request and go, this is bad and this is why it's bad. And I do put my foot down when it's a request that will make the product worse. And I've done it in a number of cases in the past, and I've argued my case to them, and I usually win because I speak English. But, but it's not really their fault. Sometimes, well, the worst case scenario, and this happens sometimes, but especially in anime committees, you have people whose job effectively is to manage the international releases. And sometimes those people decide that they need to prove that they're doing something. And then these people will be like, oh yes, I made them, I decided on this naming list, or for something or other. And then those people will be very stubborn about their decisions, and they won't allow people, they won't allow people to correct them because they make them look bad. And so there are some cases when those sorts of personal issues get in the way of good localization. With our company at J-Novel Club, I work straight with the publishers directly. There's no committees, there's no middleman, and we even often we'll send letters to the authors, and they'll go to the publishers, but the authors will read our requests, and we'll send them glossaries of name terms and everything to get their approval. So we try and get as much approval as possible, but if there's sort of a pushback, we'll make sure that we put out the best product we can. Okay, you there on the far left. Yes, you.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a thank you. I was so happy when I saw So So South Open is being translated, the light novel, and I just want to say thank you so much for choosing it and getting the rights or whatever you had to do to translate it because it's such a good series. And
well, thanks. Well, thanks a lot for the thank you. Sorcerer's Step, for those of you who didn't hear that, we announced at Anime Expo. Well, whatever. We announced at Anime Expo that we licensed a classic light novel, Sorcerer's Stabber Orphan, it was made into 2 seasons of anime back in the early 2000s, 2001, 1999, 2001, and it's based on a series of 20 light novels that came out in Japan, and there's even more now. And we licensed it, and we're translating it right now. Volume 1 is pre-order on Amazon. Please check it out. If you love 90s fantasy like Slayer, I'm just pitching it. I apologize. If you like 90s fantasy action like Slayers, or I don't know, a bunch of other scenes, they're really good. So check it out.
Is it like classic Dungeons and Dragons style?
Yeah, it's that kind of fantasy. It's got a lot of comedy too. It's less comedy than Slayers, but it's magic and action and lots of swordplay and there's stabbing of sorcerers. It's true. So check it out. It's great. It's a great book, and the same author does Another World Best Smartphone is translating it. So Steiner's having a lot of fun doing that. I'm sure he's watching right now. So everybody say hi. Okay, more questions. How about you there in front?
Okay, so do you have any idea where light novel title that can fit in a binder comes from?
Yes, I do actually. In terms of the actual history of it, I believe the real take it really started to take off when it was I Can't Believe My Little Sister Is This Cute. I believe it was the first of the, quote, light novels with really long titles that got really famous. The light novel industry in Japan is really fad-based. I don't know if you've noticed. But when someone does something and it sells a lot of books, everybody starts doing whatever that was except twice as much. And for some reason, people were like, ooh, long titles. And then it became a meme, and now it's, it's a thing. So I'm sure it'll ebb and flow, but, that's how, it's really nothing more than just jumping on a bandwagon. You, there's in front of you.
Yeah, how much Japanese do you expect your audience to know? Do you keep the honorifics like san, chan, and stuff? Do you translate the food? Do you?
Okay, so this is a complicated issue and one of those classic localization issues. I actually leave that decision to the localization team. So that's one part of I don't set a standard for the whole company thing. My personal opinion, and I don't necessarily impose this on people, I believe if the setting is a Japanese setting, like a Japanese school or the real world Japan, that it's probably a good idea to keep honorifics in the books, since I think enough of our audience knows what they mean, and even if they don't, it's just they can read it as part of the name. However, if it's a fantasy setting and there isn't really like Japanese characters in it necessarily, then I don't think honorifics I think they can usually be translated or omitted. And so it really depends on the work. As for food, I really don't like translating food. I think if it's whatever it is, if it's some dish that there's no English equivalent for, then you shouldn't. There's maybe some few exceptions. Does it really matter if it's rice instead of omelet? I don't know. They're different, right? But one has rice in it. Right, but sometimes if you can get away with doing a little thing. But I usually it's like I want to make sure that the food stays whatever it is. Otherwise, you get in trouble later. Okay, more questions. How about you in the bay far back right? Yes.
Do you have any plan on doing any visual novels in the future?
Oh, so let me ask you, what kind of visual novels would you like to see us do? Are you crazy?
That's never happening with any company.
Well, I mean, I don't have any one that I know because I don't speak Japanese and I don't read Japanese. But things like Key's work or I don't know translation one. So.
A lot of my staff does visual novels for various companies. And actually, if you want to, for example, if you want to get experience that will be useful for translating light novels, experience translating visual novels is probably the best type of experience you can get. It's still different, but it's the closest you can get to it. As a company, I don't want to get into the visual novels. And it has nothing to do with because the visual novel's medium or anything. It has to do with the fact that distribution is hard. I don't want to have to deal with Steam. I don't want to have to deal with content regulations. I don't want to have to deal with all that kind of stuff. I want to publish books. It's so much simpler. Thank you. Okay. More questions. Let me see here. How about you there, sir? Yeah.
Well, I'm a huge One Piece fan, and they recently released the Ace novels.
I think Viz did those, right?
Yeah, so they haven't been translated. You have a plan?
Oh, right. They're even in Japan. One Piece would 100% be the realm of Viz Media. We're not getting One Piece. I could ask. We might get other books from Shueisha or Shogakukan, perhaps. Probably not Shogakukan. But we could get books from the parent companies. But One Piece and or like Shonen Jump spin-off novels, like the Naruto novels or One Piece novels, I don't think we'd ever be able to get those. Sorry. But you tell Viz or Viz Media that you want to see those in print, and they can totally do those. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because I think those would sell it great. You there in the glasses there, yeah.
Do you hire people who are Japanese first language for translating only towards Japanese, or either way, either first language?
Remember what I said about how being a good writer in English is super important? If your first language is Japanese and you're a good enough writer in English, I'll hire you, but there aren't many people like that.
Some companies do that.
and I don't appreciate the way that those companies do localization. It's true. I mean, a lot of anybody who hires a native Japanese speaker, and then hires an English rewriter is not doing it in the most efficient way, and is going to lose something in the translation, in my opinion. Okay. How about you in the back? Yes.
So there are a couple examples from the Monogatari series
Mm.
where people get upset that the localization doesn't match what they're used to from fan subs.
I think I know which one you're referring to.
Or how do you feel about it?
Well, sometimes I just buy the fence. No. Actually, I actually do understand. I empathize with people. Like, my goal as a J-Novel Club, I want those people who are reading the fan translations to then read our translations. I want them to do it and feel good about it. And part of feeling good about it is not having to read a new a new spelling for their favorite character, right? When you do that, it's uncomfortable for the reader, and it's not really the reader's fault. It's the fact that different translators will choose different ways of spelling things, or a different way of translating a certain catchphrase, etc. And it's unfortunate, but honestly, if we have the ability to, if the way the fan translation did it is okay, I'm okay with being like, yeah, we'll stick with that. We did that for Ari for the most part, right?
Yeah, for
The most
quite a
part.
few terms, but
Yeah.
not everything. But also part of it's you have to make sure the fan translation that got popular didn't do it wrong.
Right.
Because in a lot of cases,
There's a big
it's
difference
true.
between like sticking with something that's just wrong and sticking with something that's a perfectly reasonable choice. So we try and toe that. We try and straddle that line between doing a good job of localization, but not changing things just because we can't spell it the same way as the fan translation because then we're copying them. No, I mean actually that's fine. As long as the readers are happy, then we will try and do the best we can. Okay, more questions? You did it, yes.
Yeah, in cases where there's an anime or manga adaptation of a title that you've already translated, has there ever been cases where the professional localization team for this has either approached you or you've approached them to kind of coordinate?
I can neither confirm nor deny that there has been back-channel communication between us and certain localization companies of the anime. And in other cases, we have definitely sent a glossary of terms to the publisher that is then sent to the anime committee that then should be forwarded to whoever is doing the official localization. Whether or not they actually use that glossary is not, unfortunately, up to us, but we do everything we can to make sure things are consistent. I will say, who's watching How Not to Summon a Demon Lord right now? You're all men and I guess a woman of good taste. But the glossary and the naming that is used in that show and Kodansha and the subtitles are all the same with our books. And the reason is because Kodansha is doing a really good job of making sure everybody is spelling things right. They got our glossary with the name spellings. They made sure the website the Japanese website was matching up, with except one error, but I actually corrected it. They made sure all the merchandise in Japan has the right spellings.
Eventually.
No, eventually. Well, that was a different issue. Let's not get into that issue. No, the names were all basically correct. So, unlike a certain Fate Stay Night series where English name spellings have been all over the place through its current, where the industry is finally sort of smartening up about, hey, we got to make sure that everything is consistent across the whole medium. It's really up to the Japanese company to make sure that happens. But we try and do the best we can to provide them the information they need.
Yeah, and I have to say I've personally been involved in plenty of titles where that isn't the case, and it's often kind of out of our control, like it was saying.
Yeah, but we do what we can because we care. Yes. Next panel. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
Who's supposed to kick us out? Anyway, thanks a lot for your time. I guess
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're actually right now.